Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over the Stafford Gambit fishing pole trap, and it is a fun one. I'm calling it the fishing pole trap because it has a lot of the same concepts that you'll see in the fishing pole trap itself, which is something I've done a video on in the past. I'll have a link in the description as well as at the end of this video if you want to go in depth in just the original fishing pole trap. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. More about them later in the video. So if you're not familiar with the fishing pole trap, starts out in the Re1 Lopez with e4, e5, knight to f3, knight c6, bishop to b5. Pretty common opening you've probably seen. The Berlin defense with knight to f6. And then after castle on the king side, knight to g4, attacking this king side here. Pawn to h3, kicking the knight back. White is saying, hey, I don't really like the knight here, and black says, I don't really care. We're going to play pawn h5, and you can see if there's an exchange, things get pretty crazy because this has now opened up this h file here. So if they move the knight back, things get wild. Queen to h4, attacking for checkmate. That is the threat here. Lots of variations in that. You can definitely check out that video. But in today's video, we're going to look at how that could play out in the Stafford Gambit. So Stafford Gambit starts out with e4, e5, knight f3, knight to f6. And then after the knight takes, the main line is just pawn d6, and the knight comes back f3. But in the Stafford Gambit, we actually play knight c6. As, yeah, we don't care. We gave up that pawn and material. We're looking for rapid development and a strong attack on our opponent. So after the knight takes, we take with our pawn, completely opening up for both of our bishops to get involved into the game. Our queen is easily available to get into the game as well. And now we can start our trap. From here, the main line is white just playing d3. And then we can get our bishop involved to c5. I have another video on the Stafford Gambit. If you're just not familiar with the opening at all, you can definitely check that out. But you can see the bishop on c5 is attacking the f2 square, one of the weakest squares for white early on, because it's only defended by the king on e2. So we're going to try everything we can to attack this king side of the board. Bishop to e2 makes a lot of sense, preparing to castle on the king side. Anytime you feel like your opponent has a lead in development, you want to make sure that your king is safe. So bishop e2 is the fastest way to go ahead and castle on the king side. We're going to play pawn h5. You can start to see the similar setup that we have in the fishing pole. Now, if they decide to go ahead and castle on the king side, we can play knight to g4. Now, we're going to look at lots of variations depending on where they go, but one of them could be to play pawn h3, attacking our knight, saying, hey, we want to go ahead and kick that away. And you guessed it, we are not going to care. Instead, we're looking to play queen d6 and attack our opponent. One thing that's great about this line compared to just the normal fishing pole trap is the bishop on c5. This is pinning down this pawn on f2, and this is definitely going to come into play for some of the variations we're going to look at. Now you can see the immediate threat is queen comes to h2, checkmate. So we're going to look at all the different ways that white can stop that and how black would actually respond. Then we'll look at some other variations if they don't play this pawn h3 early on. So the first one you can see is, let's just go ahead and take the knight on g4. In this case, we're going to recapture with our own pawn on g4. And then let's say they have e5. Really, we are threatening now the move queen to h2, and there's no way for them to stop that. So they could delay it if they want to. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it is going to be checkmate. There's no way to stop it. So that is not going to work. If they take our knight, we're just going to take with our pawn, and it is game over from there. So let's look at the next option, and that would be to play g3. From here, we can just take with our queen, because remember, this pawn on f2 is actually being pinned down, so they can't do anything. They have to move to h1, and then we can just come up here to h2, and that is going to be checkmate. Now, they may not come to g3, but they don't have a lot of other good options. Bishop to f4 just delays the same setup because now they just lose a bishop. They still have to worry about all the same threats here. They could try taking with their bishop on g4. we're going to go and take with our pawn, and they can't recapture our pawn because then it's just still checkmate. We have the same threats as before. So if they don't take our pawn here, how do they continue? Maybe they see our bishop on c5, recognize all the threats, and play bishop to e3. But then we play bishop takes, pawn recaptures. We take this pawn on h3. They can't really take it here because then our just bishop swings in. Our queen can get here. We can completely control this h-file with our rook. So maybe they play rook to f2 here. We're just gobbling up all their pawns. If they take, again, bishop h3, castle on the queen side, we're throwing everything over here, and white has no real protection in front of the king. Really, the best move that white has in this original setup is a move that's not very easy to find. After this video, you will know it though, and that is to play the move e5. Now, the first time you look at this, you may think, well, aren't they just giving up a pawn and they're in the same position? But it's actually a little bit different because after the queen takes, then the bishop can take on g4, and black can't play the normal move, and that's pawn takes here because white would have the move rook to e1, and that's pinning down the queen to the king. So because of that pin, black's actually not going to take with the pawn on g4. Instead, black would play bishop to g4. This attacks the queen, prepares to castle on the queen side, get more material into the attack. Now white can take castle on the queen side, maybe knight to d2, getting another piece over to the king side to protect. If now pawn g4, opening up all the lines for the attack, threatening the move queen to h2 checkmate. White now can play queen g4, and yes, if you're like, the queen to h2 here, but this is check, and so maybe black stops the check with f5, but white can play optimally with now knight to f3 check. So just wanted to give you an idea of how white can play correctly in this position. Again, still very difficult for them to find all the right moves. But yes, because of this video, you know how to do it. Now a word from our sponsor, Skillshare. If you're not familiar with Skillshare, it's an online community where you can pretty much take classes on any topic that you can come up with. It will look at your interest and recommend things to you, or you can always come up here and search stuff that you're interested in, and it will let you know all of the classes that they have for you to take. A lot of great content on here. I'm also thinking about creating a chess course. I love the way that they lay out their courses. I think it would be pretty cool. So if you haven't checked out Skillshare, what's nice is the first 1,000 people to use my link in the description below. I'll also have it on the pinned comment. The first 1,000 people to use that link are going to get a free month trial of Skillshare. Love to know your thoughts on it and if you think it'd be beneficial for me to create a course on it. Looking back in the trap, in this position, we just looked at white played pawn to h3, which seems like a reasonable move. We kind of talked about how it could go poorly for white, but what if they don't play h3? What if they just go ahead and take our knight right here on g4? Well, we're going to take with our pawn, and let's say they look and feel pretty safe. We haven't lost any of our pawns. We don't have to worry about this rook coming down and checkmating with our queen and the rook here. So maybe they feel safe and play knight to c3, but black can actually just go ahead and sacrifice the rook on h2. And this is really where the power of all the threats that we have come into play. If they take with their king on h2, we can just swing over here h4, and this is going to be checkmate. No way for them to stop this. We could play pawn g3. I'm playing the optimal moves just so you could see how they could try to avoid it, but at the end of the day, there's just no way for them to stop it. Bishop to g4. Maybe knight to e2 here. Pawn takes on f2, check. The king can't take it because it's defended by the queen. King to f1, queen up here, check, knight stopping it. And now there's a couple ways that you can actually checkmate here. It's always fun to get more than one queen in the game. So pawn takes on g1, promotes to a queen, and this is checkmate. The king can't come here to e2 because of the bishop. So that is one variation. Now, if we come back, maybe the king does not take that rook, but maybe instead they play pawn g3 and says, we really just cannot let this queen get involved into the action. So queen can't come to h4. It is being stopped by pawn on g3. But now black can just play rook to h3, attacking this pawn on g3. Remember, this pawn can't actually defend this pawn on g3 because it's still being pinned down by our bishop on c5. So doing a lot of extra work for black's attack. Now, if we come back earlier to the opening, we were looking at after bishop to e2, we play pawn h5, preparing for them to castle, and then we play knight g4. But what if they delay castling? What if they see that after h5, we want to play knight to g4? And so they just play h3 and say, hey, we're not going to allow you to come over here to g4. And if you do, we can take it knowing that our king is not over here on g1. We can just delay our knight moving and instead develop our other material that we want to get involved into the attack, and that is queen to d6. So now if they castle, we can play one of two moves. One, we can stick with the same theme of knight to g4. And this looks just like what we had before. So you kind of know what this would look like. Or we have another option. In this spot, we can actually play the move bishop takes on h3. And then if they take with their pawn, well, now we have the move queen to g3 check. And you can see that the pawn is still being pinned down by our bishop over here. Now after h1, the slight difference is we can't play h2 checkmate because our knight's not here on a g4, but we can change it up slightly. Things are still going to go well for us. We're going to take here on h3 after king g1, bishop to d6, preparing to checkmate on h2. They don't have a lot of good ways to stop that. They can delay it a little bit. Pawn to e5. We take, hey, bishop here. Doesn't really matter. Maybe rook to e1. Give their king a little bit of space. But at the end of the day, this is going to be checkmate. So they can't really stop it. We have some different ways to attack. Even if they don't castle right away, just develop your material like you have before. You know where your pieces need to be. Your bishop's going to be on c5. Your queen's going to be on d6. And you're just looking to throw everything at the king side of white. Thank you so much for watching the video. Hopefully you enjoyed the Stafford Gambit fishing pole trap as much as I do. Reminder that the first 1,000 people to use my link for Skillshare below will get a free month trial to check it out. Also would just love your feedback on Skillshare as a platform and if you think it would be beneficial for me to create a course on there. So thank you again so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video.